Okay, I think we can get going. So good evening to everybody. My name is Tim Bewes. I teach in the English department here. I also convene the Film Thinking series, which is what this event is part of. We've just been watching L'Amore, directed by Roberto Rossellini from 1948. And I'm delighted to welcome you to this event, which is the second Film Thinking event of the year. Thanks also to the Cogut staff for all their help publicizing and organizing this event. I'm pleased to welcome several friends and colleagues this evening. Massimo Riva on my right, Professor of Italian Studies at Brown, who, as well as directing this year's Il Cinema Ritrovato on Tour series, is acting, at least I'm calling you this, the curator of the series. In other words, he is the person responsible for the film, for choosing the film, I should say. On his right is Kristina Mendicino, who teaches in the Department of German Studies here at Brown, is currently chair of that department. And then on her right is Suzanne Stewart-Steinberg, with us for her third appearance on a film thinking platform. It's always really fun to have Suzanne here. And of course, the extraordinary thing about this film is that it's a sort of diptych. There are really two films, linked primarily by the presence of the same actor, Anna Magnani. Am I saying that?
Magnani.
Thank you.
Like lasagna.
Magnani. Playing two extremely different characters, and so of course the film functions as a sort of showcase for her range as an actor. And there are several things I think we could talk about and will talk about. First of all, there's a sort of circumstantial set of complex stories about how the film came to be made, which we could rehearse a little bit. It involves partly the relationship between the primary personnel, Rossellini and Magnani herself, but also, of course, the relationship between Rossellini and Federico Fellini, who wrote the screenplay of The Miracle and played the part of the vagabond Saint Joseph. And then part of that story is of course the banning of the second film in 1950 in the United States, and on the grounds of blasphemy, and the reversal of that after an appeal to the Supreme Court. So we should say a little bit about that in relationship to the second film. There's also a kind of story that we could tell about the place of Rossellini in relationship to cinema, the film history, cinema history. And the last time three of us were on a stage together, we were discussing Pasolini's Il Ricotta, a film that has a certain relationship to this one, I think, that we could talk about. And then there's a story about cinema itself that we always try and talk about in film thinking, cinema's capacity for thought, and in particular, the role of cinema as a philosophical and political medium, the ways in which cinema makes thinkable relations and sensations that are unique to that form, and that are bound up, I think, with its quality as a medium of sound, as a medium of space, a medium of movement, a medium of temporality. All of these are part of the sort of materiality of cinema. And also in this film, it's a medium of acting, which I think is really massively important. So we'll try to touch on these different dimensions of this film. I'd like to begin by asking Massimo, what led you to, apart from the opportunity of having it, what led you to select this film in particular for Il Cinema Ritrovato, and also to think of it as a really good film for us to talk about together?
So I'm going to take a very long shot approach, and starting perhaps from the last questions you posed, because I thought that this particular film was, besides the anniversary of Magnani's death, etc., the celebration of her as an actress, was a good fit for film thinking. I would say fundamentally because it makes us think about the specific power of the cinematic art in relation to theater, and other technologies of the voice and vision. I'm referring primarily, but not only, to La Voce Umana, which is a very faithful adaptation of Jean Cocteau's quote-unquote telephone melodrama, La Voix Humaine, and of course the casting of Anna Magnani. Now, it's important to remember that Anna Magnani had an illustrious career as a stage theater actress, from her debut in the 1930s to well into the 60s. As I mentioned before in my introduction, Tennessee Williams wrote 2 plays expressly for her, The Rose Tattoo and Orpheus Descending. And Jean Renoir, the French director who directed Magnani in The Golden Coach, his homage to the Commedia dell'arte, said that the choice of Magnani as protagonist of that film was, quote-unquote, inevitable, because Anna, he said, is the embodiment of the comédien, the absolute personification of theater. So now, Cocteau's text, also conceived for an actress of his theater company, Berthe Bovy, was written in 1930, notably at the time when films had just begun to talk, the same year, by the way, of the first direct sound Italian film, which is not therefore the Rossellini's episode, as the film note distributed at the entrance suggests. A year before, 1929, Luigi Pirandello had famously mocked in a newspaper op-ed the preposterous claim made by an unnamed American that the talking cinema will abolish or make obsolete the theater. Se il film parlante abolirà il teatro was the title of his piece. In that piece, Pirandello argued that the cinema, as an aspiring art form, would suffer from this technological development because it would lose its fundamental inspiration. That to Pirandello was a kind of silent visual musicality, now interrupted by the human voice. Also in 1929, Jean Cocteau had shot his first film, Le Sang d'un Poète, Blood of a Poet, in which, among other things, for those of you who have seen it, the eponymous poet moves along a hotel hallway looking through the keyholes of bedroom doors at a series of tableaux vivants. So in a sense, Rossellini's adaptation of Cocteau's play expands this voyeuristic idea from a peephole to the full screen and extends it to a full audiovisual kind of voyeurism. So we are looking and listening into a private conversation, indeed a monologue, an aria in operatic terms. In fact, Cocteau was adapted as an opera by Georges Poulain. Mirror shots further complicate the mise-en-scène and the spectator's position, making it clear that the episode, the whole film indeed, I'm going to argue, not only attempts to dissect what we call primal emotions on camera, the two sides of love as a passion, but it's also a study of the cinema itself as a technology, a dispositif, an audiovisual apparatus. In fact, this is very much a crucial point in Rossellini's development. This also relates to what Rossellini said of the cinema in the quote reported by Rosenbaum when he compared film to a microscope, in that it can take us by the hand and lead us to the discovery of things the eye alone could never perceive. He actually meant close-ups, details, etc. But paradoxically, Rossellini understood his statement, the cinema as a microscope that reveals the invisible, as a fulfillment of the neo-realist rule set by Cesare Zavattini, follow the character, literally. Now, I said paradoxically because here we come to a second and more important reason why the film makes us think about the cinema as an art form that encompasses all the voyeuristic possibilities of the voice and the image and their synesthetic combination. In his 19 29 op-ed, Pirandello wrote that when the shadows of cinema speak, he meant the figures on the screen, quote, the living voice clashes with their essence of shadows and unsettles the listener, the viewer, as this unnatural phenomenon reveals its mechanism, end quote. In other words, speaking cinema is to Pirandello the embodiment of the uncanny. Almost a century after Pirandello, of course, Pirandello's statement that we are entirely used to the uncanniness of cinematic talking shadows, and the technological uncanny, of course, has gone much, much further in the age of deep fakes, etc. Yet Pirandello's sentence resonated with me watching L'Amore, a film that is almost 80 years old, the magnification of Magnani, or better for us, of Magnani's shadow. And what is fascinating and somewhat uncanny in L'Amore, including the second episode, The Miracle, is that Rossellini's stalking, we could say his shadowing of Magnani's persona in her boudoir and all the way up the Calvary, does not lead to any mystical revelation of the invisible, but to a somewhat blasphemous one, a reflection of the radical Catholic humanism that Rossellini pursued with his cinema and with the language of his cinema. Mm-hmm. That's precisely what really upset the reactionary and misogynist American Catholics that challenged the film in court. In Italy, the film was well received by Catholics. They thought it was very, interesting.
But they got it better.
But they got it better. This revelation is also a kind of pure cinematic epiphany, pure poetry, as Cocteau might have said. And I'll let you decide. We'll discuss what this poetic cinematic catharsis or epiphany is at the end of The Miracle. It confirms, and I close, that for a century since it started talking, the cinema has been, perhaps more than any other technology of the voice and vision, the true mirror of our individual and collective soul or psyche, also in the Jungian sense of anima. There's a play there. Rossellini is looking at Magnani in that kind of reflective. Remember the Asa-Nishimasa game of 8.5, of Fellini's 8.5. I don't know if you remember, the Asa-Nishimasa anima, and it's all a Jungian play, but also about the cinema. It has been the mirror precisely because of its technological uncanniness. And of course, the uncanny ability of great actresses like Magnani, the ultimate comédien, to lay it all bare for us. So that's my statement, but there is much to say about this film, of course.
Thank you. I mean, I'm tempted to go immediately with your lovely phrase, somewhat blasphemous, which sounds to my eyes, a little bit like somewhat pregnant.
Yes, exactly.
Absolutely, very.
But let's get to The Miracle in a moment. I think that it's very crucial. Some of those things that you were saying, a telephone melodrama. I mean, this is a film. It seems to me that is partly about at least the relationship between sound and image. I mean, we were talking a little bit in the break about why this is not called the human face, it's called the human voice. It could equally be called the human face. The film is so visual, so preoccupied with visuality. And it seems to me that this film could not be created. I mean, film could not have been made without the telephone, because the telephone is a medium in which people talk to each other without seeing each other. Mm-hmm. So there is something unique about the fact of a telephone conversation. They can lie to each other. They can lie to each other about, for example, what they are wearing. And they can lie to each other about what they did earlier that evening, and they can lie to each other about where they are right now. In other words, the fact of the telephone is a technology that changes what is cinematically and dramatically, and therefore, in a way, thought-wise, possible in cinema. So I think we should talk a little bit more about the first film, the human voice, in relationship to this set of scenarios that we encounter. A telephone juxtaposed with the cinema. The series of lies that we have operating throughout the film, and acting. I mean, when she lies, she's also acting, right? She's acting to her interlocutor. So the film stages a certain relationship of acting that seems to me to destabilize every utterance that we encounter. So I wonder whether maybe first Kristina and then also Suzanne would like to say something about how you're approaching this technological dimension of this film.
Thank you so much for this question. It's exactly the relationship to the locus of where language is happening that really interested me in this film. And I wonder what kind of truth we're talking about when we also think about the lying that's taking place. On the one hand, even after the anonymous protagonist recognizes that she has been lied to because she tries to call back and gets the house servant instead, she's clinging to the line. Her life is on the line. She says it. It's in the Cocteau play as well, and we were talking about this a little bit before. And what's important seems to be the possibility of a response on the part of the other, the possibility of a connection to the phone. And then the question is, where are those limits drawn? What is being desired and sought in that scene? And I found it to be especially interesting in the context of your remarks on the Catholic dimension of this film, that when she is cut off, she also says, "My God," and holds the phone continuously, but starts to have the receiver by her mouth and continues to talk. And I think this is also a clear signal that the other that is at stake and that the phone connects her to is not limited to the other on the other end of the line, but the other that is addressed and intended in making the call, in addressing per se. And because she is also constituted and destituted in that relationship to where she can reach the other, I think this is also what allows for the back and forth that we see many times in this to take place, where there's a question of, do I hear you? Do you hear me? This almost becomes interchangeable, and my life is there so long as I'm on the phone with you. And then the question becomes, maybe if we were to go back to the question of where truth is located, is the big other whom we are addressing when we address, period, consistent or not?
Right.
And I think that's where the inconsistency of the other and the breakdown of the call and the breakdown of her also becomes really important to the question of truth.
Right, because she's a subject of the telephone,
Yes.
isn't she, in some sense? And is she also a subject of the cinema? I mean, is this part of what's happening, Suzanne? What do you think?
Well, actually, just to say something a little bit more about sound. What is really striking in the first film, not so much in the second, is the very complex relationship between diegetic sound and extradiegetic sound, and I think it's the complexity of, and I'll say a little bit and explain that better in a minute. Diegetic means that the character can hear the sound, okay, and so we have Roberto Rossellini's music playing, you know, that da 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 da, you know, which is sort of the theme of the film, and then it slowly fades out, and it is taken over by street noises, babies crying, the sound of the dog. I've not figured out the dog at all. And then you have this phone situation where it becomes unclear where that voice of the other is, right? In other words, does she hear it? We don't, but does she? I mean, one could imagine that she's fantasizing this phone call, but there is no confirmation about any of this.
You can hear a little bit. You can hear,
but only later. You know, and it's only after she says, "Oh, this phone machine sounds different." And then we suddenly hear the sort of crackling noise, but it's not quite clear. And then there's a cut about halfway through where the soundtrack comes back, the Rossellini score, disappears again. and it's not clear what that means, you know. But it seems to me that it is in the uncertainty of who's hearing what at any given point that Rossellini is trying to get to a situation of thinking about when sound lies and when it doesn't.
Right.
And I think ultimately says it's not clear.
But
Right.
I love this distinction between which you made, which is a technical distinction, diegetic sound and extra diegetic sound. But it makes me think that there's also something, one could almost say the same about acting, when one has a character who is lying on screen. In
Yes.
other words, we have intradiegetic or diegetic acting,
Yes.
in other words, lying, and
Right.
we have extra diegetic acting, in other words, the actor that we're seeing on screen
As honest.
in front of us.
Yep.
And you know, when there is, I mean, Deleuze calls this relationship the double face of the actor. When you have a character who is acting on stage or lying, then something truly sort of ontologically dismantling happens, and we don't know whether the acting is taking place diegetically or extra-diegetically. So something really interesting. In other words, we don't know if she's lying on stage, on screen. We don't know if any of it is lying, right? We don't know if the love, if te amo is
No,
lying.
you know, the minute she says, well, it's complicated because
Yeah.
she says, I'm wearing a black dress.
Yes.
We can see that she's not wearing a black dress. So it's a little bit different at that moment.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But she says that right from the beginning.
Right from the
All
beginning.
this is very interesting, particularly because this film, at least Rossellini says, is an exercise in going deeper into the neorealist, you know, codes, etc. So
what does he mean by
completely-
that? What is he referring to
Well,
specifically in that
Well, to
claim
follow the
about
character,
neorealism?
but in two ways, you know. So the claustrophobic, close-up, analytical dissection of, you know, of the first episode, and then au plein air, this amazing, you know, opening up of the second.
Yeah.
And so that's already, you know, an interesting contrast here. But also, I would say this whole idea of following the character is so powerful for Rossellini. What does it mean, following the character? Certainly not what it meant for Zavattini, etc. Here is going into the character, into the construction of a character, and that's very, very interesting.
Yeah,
What you were saying.
and I think what's also interesting is that in the beginning, to go back to the question of the cinema and the mirroring that you had mentioned before, Tim, there's a very intimate relationship to the specular. We see her going to the bathroom. We see her looking into the mirror there. And then when she goes back to the bed, there's the telephone, but there's also a hand mirror, and she will look at the hand mirror and put that down first. So what kind of a line does she have to her image? And it seems like she's looking for what she's going to find there. So it's not that the image is necessarily also disclosive, but also a possible questioning.
But let me
that's
ask a
correct.
kind of like interpretive question. When she says to him on the other end of the phone, you didn't see what I saw in the mirror. What is she referring to?
I don't think that we know. I mean, I don't know. I mean, how would we know what she sees or what she's looking for when she's looking into that mirror? It is interesting, though, that as soon as she can forge a relationship to the telephone and continue to talk, the mirror is no longer very significant until that cut, where then she is cut off, goes back to bed, closes the bathroom
tone of her voice
door.
changes.
Right, the tone of the voice changes, and then she sees herself again for a moment
Yeah.
when the door is closed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, she also refers to him calling her
Ugly.
Ugly, yeah, exactly. So, I mean, I was wondering if that was a reference to that. I mean, I think we should also let's talk about the second part of the film. So, because we want to open things up to the audience also in a few minutes. Something similar happens in this film, I think. Something radically unsettling around the question of the saint. First of all, I mean, it seems very obvious that he's not really a saint, but we don't.
The silent saint.
Well,
silence.
in the end, we don't know. I mean, we don't see any kind of abuse happening.
Come on.
We don't see
You
it.
couldn't.
If it happens,
You couldn't put it on screen.
If it happens, it is off screen. The most shocking scene of the film, of course, is the scene where she goes down to the village. She is initially mocked, sort of satirically. By the way, I mean, we will all have realized this, in the same way that Jesus was mocked,
that's
right?
yes,
Obviously, the robe is put upon her, the flowers are cast to her. She has the basin.
Giving birth and
They give the crown
The,
of
yeah,
life.
the basin is put on her
The same
father. They
lines.
do not know what.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's an obvious kind of reference. It's a shockingly violent film, and it's the moment where the film's entire relationship to Catholicism is sort of tilts and is both inaugurated and also goes onto a new plane. So can we talk about this, the Catholicism of this film, and is Rossellini honest or being talking in earnest when he says, "For me, this is a Catholic film through and through"?
It's absolutely a Catholic film, but that's because Rossellini is a Catholic filmmaker, and I mean, I think one has to sort of keep in mind that he was just finishing the War trilogy. 1945 is Open City, made with Anna Magnani, whom he kills off halfway through the film.
Mother,
Huh?
a mother.
And she is the mother, and she has a death that is then staged. She's cradled by the priest. It looks like a Pietà thing. I mean, and then there's 46 is Paisan, and then in 48 he was making Germany Year Zero, and it's 48. This is for Italy a very, very important year. It's the first national elections for Italy as a republic, and everybody, I mean, not everybody, well, let's say the United States was certainly very, very busy trying to get Christian democracy in power. And so there was this enormous campaign for a kind of lefty, socialisty, but Catholic, political arena. And this film belongs, I think, squarely into that.
In what sense, Suzanne? How would you see that?
Well, I mean, in Open City,
because 48 is also the breaking up of the coalition out of the resistance.
Yes, all the eggs are being thrown into the Christian Democratic basket, right?
Right.
So a kind of populist aspect of this, particularly in the South, was necessary to keep this thing going. But Rossellini had already in Open City proposed a kind of soft, pink, sort of, humanitarian solution for Italy that, however, ends, final shot, the children of the future walking towards the Dome of St. Peter's. And this, to me, there are so many shots in the second part that repeat, I mean, her being on the wall is, right out of, Open City. It's not Magnani in this case who's on the wall, but a man. And so this brings also the question of how do these films connect?
Yes, but look, let me just ask another version of the Catholic. Okay, so it's a Catholic movie, but quite early on in the second part of the film, we have an exchange between two brothers, one of whom sees the Madonna every day, finds her beautiful, is in no doubt about it. The other one sees nothing and is dismissed by the first monk as a materialist. Don't listen to him; he's a materialist. So the question is then, okay, if this is a Catholic film, is it a Catholic materialist Catholic film or a spiritual Catholic film?
I would say spiritual. Remember, she's not allowed into the church, right? She cannot be part of the institution. She is cast out into the manger, right, or whatever.
The interesting thing to me, and the real blasphemous aspect of this film, is the fact that it takes the miracle of pregnancy of Mary and turns it upside down. So it's not, it turns it upside down because it is Joseph, who we don't
Yes.
see him, but who is actually impregnating Nina,
Perhaps.
and the passion, the real passion, is the passion of a mother giving birth. So it's really taking the dogma of the Son of God, etc., the Calvary, etc., and replacing it powerfully with this, homage to motherhood, I would say, motherhood in a sacrificial sense, of course. And this is very powerful. And Italian Catholics are very sensitive to motherhood,
Well, the Marian
aspects, and the Marian, etc. They took it in stride. I mean, they thought it was a spiritual, it was great, regenerate. American Catholics, on the other way, and reacted very negatively to the point that they wanted to indict this film. So, but I think this is really the core of the miracle, and it's called the miracle precisely because it's the Immaculate Conception that is, turned upside down. Yeah.
So I think we should maybe open things up. So we do have some time left. We also have a couple of microphones, one on each side of the aisle. Please, I'll identify you as a question asker. Please wait for the microphone to arrive. Then we'll all be able to hear what you say, and we'll ask. We'll try to address your questions. Stuart.
Hi, well, thanks very much. This is responding, Suzanne, you said you're wondering what connects the two films. One thing that connects them, I'd say, would be off-screen space, because and off-screen space used completely differently, right? In the first film, it's not, you could almost say it's not diegetic, it's not coterminous with her world, right? We don't know where the man is. As you say, he might not even exist, but if he exists, we don't know where he is, in a restaurant or at home. He's not, whereas the second film uses off-screen space in this really fascinating way, right? The baby that we hear is off-screen, but it's coterminous, right? She can, it's part of the world that we see even though we don't see it, which is one of the kind of miracles of film, I think, this creation of off-screen space, which we don't see by definition, and yet is still part of the world that we do see in a way. But also, I would say that, for me, I think he is a saint because I feel that no time passes. I see him. I think that is Saint Joseph, even though I don't believe in Saint Joseph. I think that is Saint Joseph because no time passes. I don't think there's the time for. I don't have the sense that time has passed. I don't have the sense that when she's alone, that we're in a different temporal moment from when. That's arguable, but my point is because whatever happens off-screen, or in off-screen space, and we can't be certain that time has passed. So we enter another time, which would be the time of the miracle, I would say, which is a different kind of conception of time altogether. Yeah. So I'm wondering if you could talk about off-screen space and the way that it works in both of the films we saw.
Can I interject something about Fellini? Because Fellini plays the role of the saint, and so the idea of Fellini was probably completely different to what Tullio Pericoli and Rossellini made of the subject. Was completely a different film. Also, and this is just an anecdote, but Fellini had to dye his hair blonde, golden, in order to create this hair. So he was a saint. And in fact, he kept being a saint for a while because the dye would not go away. So his friends are saying, when Fellini came back to Rome after shooting the film, oh, wow, who is this? They were in awe of Fellini. Sorry, that's a joke, but in a sense.
I had one spontaneous thought. I wonder whether off-screen space is also very important for constructing something like what the title of both films together is, namely love. And to think cinematically about what that could possibly mean, and to relate it to the absence of the other and the ability or non-ability to respond, or the awaiting of a response, and in the end, all the way through to the sequestration of the baby to the off-screen space, where she's addressing this figure with love. I feel like the relegation of something off screen also has a lot to do with the way love is being constructed. But that's a really spontaneous read.
Yeah, and somehow I immediately again want to connect it to the question of where the sound is. Because, I mean, Joseph never speaks, right? I mean, she does all the talking, and which of course allows her to keep the fantasy going, right? And so it's not quite clear even whether he's there, right? I mean, this is, comes back to this question between the two friars. Are we talking materiality here? Or are we talking about visions? It's is there really a baby? I mean, even that one could sort of throw up. And then again, there is so much emphasis in the first one on sound that's going on the street. And, it actually it reminded me really strongly of the final act of Verdi's Traviata, where she is in the room, is dying, and the way we understand that dyingness is because life is going on outside. And that you really get the feeling from that. And she's constantly also listening to it. Is he at the door? Or what kinds of sounds, would be a sign of that offstage? Yeah.
Any other questions? I saw a lot of hands up earlier, but does anyone have anything else? I mean, I just on this question of materialism and idealism, I don't think we can definitively answer that question. It seems to me that the film goes out of its way to make an answer to that question impossible. Yeah. So at every moment when one could possibly answer that question, it declines to do so. So it seems to me that we're in a sort of interstitial realm of the materiality of the spiritual, or let's say, the impossibility of deciding between the spiritual.
I think that exchange is also the most political comment made by Rossellini, because the one between the dialogue, the short dialogue, almost a vignette between the two friars, because the one who says that he's a materialistic, is clearly a fool of God. Is like her. And the other one is clearly the political, the representative of the political transformation of Italian Catholicism. Clearly taking the Marshall Plan from the United States.
Exactly.
So that's.
I mean, it seems to me this is Italian Catholicism, right?
Yeah.
It can be everything. You can go to church, you cannot go to church, you can see the Virgin every day, you cannot, and it's very ecumenical, and it's a broad church, so to speak. But I think this is really, I think he really means this.
And 48 is when the Madonnas started crying in Italy.
That's right.
During the electoral campaign,
I mean,
all the Madonnas, the icons, etc., started crying, and the miracle was precisely the tears of the Madonnas, the possibility that the communist and socialist parties would win the election. That was the moment.
I mean, all of these women were made saints.
Yes.
Is there a question there?
Just a question about the film Anthology. Were these always seen together? It's really interesting that it's an odd length, shorter length for the first one, and was it seen here in the States before the second one, while there was all that brouhaha?
Right. Now, I think the miracle was seen much more as a single film than the combination. And in general, the miracle had a different run, before the censorship, let's say. But yes, but this was conceived as a diptych, as it was said, amor sacro, amor profano. Profane and sacred love, to some extent. That's the.
But I think when it was banned in the US, it was in a premiere in 1950 where it was shown with two other films by two other directors. So it's actually a part of two different anthologies, as I understand it. Yeah. So any other kind of comments, Ling Zhen?
Yes, just quickly, could you or any of you can talk a little bit about the censorship, why it was banned here For what reason? And
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear.
the censorship
why,
or the
why,
ban?
why was the
Blasphemy.
film banned?
Blasphemy.
Blasphemy.
Yes, blasphemy. And the sentence of the Supreme Court, if I remember correctly, was in the name of free speech.
Right.
That could be could not be condemned on a religious ground because it was a statement by an artist, etc. So that sentence was actually very relevant for
And led directly to the revision of censorship laws
In
in the U.S. around cinema, right? So
Yeah.
cinema began to be seen as
Yes. It's interesting. In Italy, we have
Explicable through
right,
free
a law called vilipendio della religione. How would you translate that? Vilipendio della religione.
Vilification.
Vilification of religion, and so that's actually was not evoked by Italian Catholics for Rossellini, but certainly by American Catholics. Yeah.
Okay. Any other comments or?
Can I? Yeah, I'd love to ask a question. It's really interesting to hear you talk about the relationship to sound, which is so directly related also to what the film is doing in terms of working with different kinds of spaces. And I just wondered if you could say a little bit more about your thoughts on this pairing of films that are, on the one hand, in a very confined space. You have used the word sort of claustrophobia also to describe what's happening in that room. And then this use of the landscape. And I'm interested also in the shots of land as a kind of part of maybe of the passion story that you're talking about, or maybe it's doing some other kind of work for the film or for his work with the actor too.
Can I say just a quick thing? Because I think there was a genre in the 1930s during fascism, a film genre that was called telefoni bianchi.
I was just gonna
the white
yeah,
telephones,
exactly,
right. Here the telephone is black, and but that's
Super
clearly
important.
right. And the contrast is instead with this landscape, this open landscape that turns into a spiritual landscape, but is also a real landscape, which is the signature dimension of neorealism, opening up. And Paisa, Rossellini had already shot and one episode of Paisa, in that particular location, the monastery, etc.
But one thing that's also interesting about the telephone scenario is that it's very, on the one hand, she is in this room and she talks about remaining in the room. On the other hand, distances become impossible to assess. And we had talked before about we don't know where the other is. Right. She also starts to wonder whether he's there. Exactly. Right. And so on the one hand, there's dislimitation of her possible connection to other locations of which we know nothing, and on the other hand, this possibility that distance and proximity are so difficult to assess. He may very well be at her door, and then the extra diegetic sound becomes interesting because she suddenly attends to the sound of someone entering the building.
Entering the building.
Yeah.
Yep.
I was just curious if you can comment if Fellini had any underlying thoughts about the concept of love, because the first film was clearly, she was intoxicated, and I know this is more of a modern look, but I almost thought she might have, one interpretation you mentioned was it could be a fantasy, but also that she could be just having mental illness. Because I noticed the conversations, it was basically a monologue. It was very pressured speech. Her significant other, hardly, there was no back and forth. And as far as, like the dog, for example, she was having almost these thoughts that were kind of paranoid, like, the dog might bite me and the dog is dangerous and I should get rid of the dog, et cetera, et cetera. But just in terms of the theme of love, does the creator of the film have any other past works on the theme of love?
Rossellini, of course, massive,
Rossellini.
huge number.
Rossellini or Fellini? Fellini.
Well, Fellini would take us a little bit in a different direction, but it's interesting that the theme of madness, and La Voix Humaine. I talked about Almodovar adaptation. You know, Women on the Verge of the Nervous Breakdown was partly based on Cocteau.
Oh.
And then he made finally, so Almodovar said, so there is one kind of, in that first episode, there is one kind of mental illness or love madness, if you wish, that kind of malady of love. In the second one, there is a different kind of, you know, it's the sacred, as I said before, the sacred version of that. Still madness. She's, you know, she's a fool. She's clearly, you know, a person, a delirious person. But her, you know, madness is rescued. It becomes or redeemed and turns into a miracle. So there is also a play on that particular. And you know, I would say the element of you know, deception in the first episode is very in the mirror, but also the fact that we hear only what she hears on the phone, and also she is. It's everything is fake in that space, while everything is sort of aiming at truth or some sort of truth in the other space. So it's very interesting. Yeah. The more you analyze these two episodes, the more, you know, they are really strictly tied together. Yeah.
And the correct subtitle should not be two stories of love. It should be two stories of belief, or two stories of truth, or two stories of, you know, So.
You know, can I just add one more thing?
Yes,
just about, I mean, because I think it should be brought up at some point, is the fact that Rossellini and Magnani were breaking up while this film was being made, right?
Magnani didn't know.
And Magnani didn't know, okay?
No,
I mean, no.
I'm sure she sensed
No, I think she was aware of
Yes.
it, but I mean, he was already on to Ingrid Bergman. And I think this is just kind of extraordinary, right? That you would have, he's making a film, and the woman he's ditching, he's putting her into the, you know, the position of the ditched person and have her act it out. So that's kind of cruel. I mean, the film is incredibly difficult to watch.
And in Ingrid Bergman's rendition of the same play is far inferior to Anna Magnani's rendition. Andrea.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm just wondering whether, because you were referring to both episodes being a version of a thing that happened, but we don't know what happened. And so there is this intermediary space between extradiegetic and interdiegetic, which is a kind of temporal space of what happened before. So basically the event, which seems to be the origin. Because while we were watching the film, like both episodes, we were wondering what actually happened between these two people. And I'm wondering whether there is a connection between, you know, cinema as a medium and its ability or inability to show the encounter itself, or cinema is always already a kind of reflection of the lie, and without the possibility of actually showing the kind of the origin, the truth upon which it can only show, you know, the versions or something.
But if I may, I think there is. I think it's a question of what is truth. Are we thinking about truth in terms of a correspondence to a verifiable occurrence with evidence that then we can reformulate and repeat and prove through further evidence, or is the suffering that happens in, for example, the second part, the truth of the film? And I wonder whether something is disclosed in that manner when we watch it, because there are also interesting shifts in the way that she responds. In the beginning, when she's talking to either the vision of the saint or the figure who happens to be passing by, she's able to talk about how the townspeople call her crazy. That doesn't happen afterwards, but she is pregnant and she does suffer, and we do see that. So I wonder if the event is somehow traumatically bracketed or inaccessible, but on the other hand, something else is shown. And one is asked by the film to think about what is and can be shown and where the truth may be located in it.
I think Deleuze says this best in Cinema too. the cinema must film not the world, but belief in the world, our only link. And that's what I think that's what we get in these two films. We do not get the world being filmed. We get a character's encounter with the very possibility of belief, in fact. And that possibility is being staged by both of these films, and it's not resolved. And in fact, what's being staged is the irresolvability of that question.
I would disagree, though. The second, I think the ending of The Miracle is a powerful statement. Certainly this applies to the first episode, when.
But what does it resolve, the ending of The Miracle?
The miracle. It's a miracle. I mean, giving birth and it's.
But isn't
the
point of a miracle that it's neither true or false? True, if it were just simply truth, it wouldn't be a miracle anymore, right? So it is that kind of paradoxical structure.
Right.
But I see a very strong contrast between these two episodes. They are really positioned one against the other, and so I think that's why I read the ending of The Miracle as something that is in contrast to to this idea of.
So just to clarify, which monk are you with? The Raffaello or the
A or B?
I wish I would be with the Franciscan fool, but I'm not.
Okay.
What year is the St. Francis film?
The Francis film is 49, I think.
Okay, so he's like on the way.
He was already thinking about Fioretti, San Francisco with flowers, San Francisco flowers. Yeah.
What have we still not talked about yet in the film? I'm sure there are things, but in the final, yes.
Hi. We were just wondering, in Il Miracolo, what do you make of the apple scene in the church? Because there's obviously some symbolism there, and obviously one thinks of the Eden and Adam and Eve, but here is like she's running away with the apple. So it's like just a weird scene, and we were just curious of how can we interpret it?
That's a good question. The apple.
I have no idea what that apple scene is.
Well, I mean, I'm sure that's part of the. I think what I was saying. Well, I mean, it's the only plausible. Besides the fact that he all of a sudden wanted to have an apple, because she was pregnant. But I mean, the idea is precisely sort of reversing or inverting the whole symbolism of the Passion of Christ.
Right. I mean, sometimes an apple is only an apple, right?
Right.
But also the thief.
In this case, I don't think
at that moment, she becomes a thief, and the thief. I mean, she's also at that moment just about to be ostracized in a major way by the village. Of course, it's the occasion for the Cosimiro, is that his name? Yeah. The name to expunge her from the precincts of the church. But why an apple? I mean, I'm not sure either why. But I think certainly you said it, the Genesis, the
biblical,
the Edenic theme is maybe suggested.
Unless it's just pure hunger. I mean, really. I mean, it's the materiality again.
Yeah.
It also seems like it becomes a problem when this Casimiro starts chasing her and wants the apple too.
Right.
And if there is an allusion to the Adam and Eve scene, Eve gives Adam the apple. Here's the man, and he wants it, and she won't give it. But on the other hand, what's interesting is that there's a whole basket of apples. So if one were to attribute significance to this one, it's also, I think, undermined by the fact that we're shown the plentiful basket.
Exactly.
It's not clear that the woman holding the basket doesn't realize that she's taking it.
Because she lifts it.
Yeah.
But the apple is already in Magnani's hand.
Okay, so I think we should end. Thank you very much to the three of you for joining me in this conversation. Thanks to everybody for attending the film and sticking around afterwards. It's great to be here with you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.